Bonjour! Bonsoir, dear friends. Aren't we fortunate? We have, dear friends, the visit of our artistic friend, the famous Alex Hunt, master of wine, master of psychology, master of philosophy, master of wine. He's the master of all trade. I called him the Renaissance man out of England. He's the surrealist new dream of who we would want to be when we grow up. And he's very young and very accomplished. As you can see.
Oh man, that was going so well.
It's amazing. Alex, thank you. Welcome to California.
Thank you. I need a drink now. I'm so rusty.
What a great way. Why do you think you're so rusty? Because you haven't played in 2 weeks?
I've been here for 2 weeks. I came on November the 8th, day 0, when we were allowed back into the US after a 20-month travel ban. So I've been away from home and away from my piano.
Well, now your piano is in front of you. It's not perfectly tuned. John, you were the last one to play here. As you can see, I kept your picture. And now we have the famous Alex Hunt. So Alex, first of all, welcome to California.
Thank you. So great to be back.
Well, we're delighted. We had Alex to do an amazing live. It was 9 months ago. It was such a success. We ended up on a tangent of philosophy, sensory, the relationship of wine to the brain, which is where the background that he has. And it was so amazing that we're going to go into a similar way. But let's start with music.
Sure.
I mean, how did you start to become such a virtuoso?
Oh, wow, I definitely wouldn't call myself that, but I was just encouraged to play from a very early age. I mean, I started piano lessons at 3 and have been, dipping in and out of it ever since. But I learned at school and did a few instruments. And I think before you're old enough to get into this stuff and you still have an aesthetic thirst, what better way to sate that thirst?
A true thirsty Renaissance man. And we'll tell you the journey, but what makes wine and piano and classical music? Who were you playing here?
That was Rachmaninoff Prelude in E flat, Opus 23, number 6.
I want to have more drinks with this. And we love jazz, we love pop, we love everything, but personally, Alex, I'm a big fan of classical music on the piano, and I listen to it endlessly. My grandmother was a great pianist, and her favorites were Chopin, Beethoven, and I love with her playing a little bit of Bach. And Bach was my ultimate favorite, Jean-Sébastien Bach, but impossible to play correctly.
Bach is amazing and so timeless. It is really the essence of music, and I still, when I play Bach, I can't quite believe how long ago that music was somehow formed from the air. But then Beethoven as well. I mean, Beethoven is a huge hero of mine. And
me too, my favorite.
And I think, maybe the person who most fast-forwarded through that transition of the composer or artist as servant to the composer as hero.
That's right.
And you could only do that by writing some of the best music that the world has ever known. There's no shortcut.
No shortcut. So as you taste this wine, you got to demonstrate another piano piece, because we want to hear from Alex how wine inspires you to play music and vice versa. What wine inspires you to play what music? Because, they go together, don't they? And somehow they could conflict to one another.
Well, they do. And, it's playing the piano, if you are a rank amateur like myself, is quite difficult to do under the influence of alcohol. So hopefully, this isn't too much, but it's a good,
I think he could take a lot.
It's a very good thing to do before you start drinking wine. So
well, I'm going to give you more wine because I want to see you actually playing under the influence.
Oh, well.
We'll be back in a few hours, dear friends.
But I mean, we talk about Bach and we talk about sparkling wine. And so this is something that comes to mind. It's that kind of thing, it's the prelude in C sharp major from the first book of the 48, the Old Testament, if you like, of piano music, if Beethoven's sonatas are the New Testament.
Love this vision. So, when you drink sparkling, besides this piece, what else in terms of music? Because I know you play other instruments as well, right? What comes to your mind, and why is music eventually so important?
Well, I think, if music is your kind of primary aesthetic interest and where you started out, then I suppose it has the biggest influence on maybe the way you think about other aesthetic things. Whereas maybe if you're a painter, first and foremost, you might think more in terms of color, let's say, when you try a wine. But I tend to think in terms of treble, middle, and bass quite often, and of resonance and these kind of acoustic terms. And I think what's interesting is that you see these tasting terms crop up quite a lot, because after all, almost every word we use to describe wine is metaphorical. You can describe the alcohol and the acidity and the structure of the wine that is physically measurable, but then you run out of topics quite quickly.
I agree.
It's important, but it's just the base, the basis, I should say, of the wine. And then after that, we might liken it to fruits and flowers, and there might be some chemical analogues between those things, but it's still, when we talk about it in a non-chemical way as wine lovers, it's a metaphor.
That's right.
And I think it's true. People talk about top notes on a wine without even thinking about it. But this is sort of what they're meaning up here. It's the treble. It's the brightness. It's the lift of the wine.
That's right.
And you could, in a very simplistic way, plot a graph of treble in Napa Valley over time. And it's going along in the old days, in 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s. There's quite a lot of it, because we're talking about Cabernet, we're talking about Pyrazines, we're talking about moderate ripeness, and this crunchy Bordeaux style of wine. Lots of treble, not too much bass. It's not too thick and woolly down at the bottom. And so you have these bright, brisk wines. And then the ripeness effort starts to come in, and people start dialing up the ripeness, and the treble starts going down. And you start experiencing, as a Napa wine drinker, what Beethoven was experiencing. He didn't go deaf one day to the next. He lost the top end first, and in the end it was all muffled. And so you get the start of the Waldstein Sonata, and it's all down here. And as someone's analysed this, I think that as his life went on, he got deafer and deafer from the top down, and more, he's more exploring down at the bottom end of the piano like this. And then when he was stone deaf, apparently he kind of gave up on that and just wrote the full compass once again, because because it was all inaccessible to him.
So how could he have produced so many incredible pieces even as he was deaf?
Well, I think that it goes to show just how much extraordinary minds like that are capable of producing without a sort of empirical feedback. You know, if I'm arranging a piece of music, you know, it's by trial and error because I'm not really trained in that, and so I'll have a few goes at it and see what comes out. He and Mozart and all the great composers could just write music down on the page, and you know, now we can't even, you know, navigate or meet someone without the support of a mobile phone. You know, that kind of real mental capacity is perhaps a little more vestigial now in most of us. And they were always extraordinary people anyway, of course. But being able to harness that imagination and create the extraordinary late music that he did, especially the last quartets, you know, after he really stopped writing piano music. These are transcendental pieces that half the time sound like they were written in the late 20th century. I mean, this is when, you know, he's almost like the whole of Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, he starts really with a fairly primal expression and then goes through life, and in the end, it's way out. It's space age stuff, and all condensed in, you know, in I think a 56-year life or something. I mean, he didn't live all that long, and yet maybe had he not been forced, I mean, at terrifying mental cost to himself, to confront the loss of the sense that meant the most to him, we wouldn't have been blessed with such extraordinary music towards the end of his life.
Would you give us a taste of that quartet at the end of his life?
I wouldn't. It's because it needs the texture of the strings, unfortunately. Yeah. It's just unreproducible on a piano, so I've never even tried.
Anything from him you want to show us in addition to what we just heard? Because, dear friends, aren't we blessed? We're going to talk wine. Maybe we'll talk a little caviar and texture, but anything on the music that you want to give us as a description of wine. If you were to, you've described this one. If you go to Burgundy now, Pinot Noir, you talked so eloquently about Napa Valley Cabernet as an example, as far as where you go on the keyboards. Where would you go in Pinot? Let's say we are in Clos Vougeot, my home village, my hometown, you know, my baby wine. When I was a child, that's what my mother was giving me.
Well, I think, you know, Burgundy is so, versus Cabernet, which is so architectural and structured and straight, you know, Burgundy is much more sprawling and wild and, you know, and outdoors. You know, I find Cabernet is quite a sort of urban wine in the best sense. You know, like the perfect proportions of Georgian architecture in London is my idea of Cabernet. And Burgundy is a wild meadow. So probably I'd be going back to that more romantic sort of stuff, like that Rachmaninoff or Chopin or whatever it might be. That would be nice, yeah, for sure.
Mahler, Ravel.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose some French composers ought to be mentioned. Yeah.
Debussy?
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan of Debussy as well.
Oh, Debussy's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. My grandmother was Debussy, Chopin. Chopin, Debussy. Yeah. You know, can you believe she was attaching me to the piano? I couldn't go soccer unless I practiced my piano.
Oh, really?
And obviously I turned out to become an absolutely atrocious piano player. So I never dare anymore to go on it, but this is one of the most amazing instruments. I mean, there's a big parallel for you, I feel, as a philosopher, psychologist, master of wine, artist, and pianist. I think that triangular relationship is so powerful together, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Or it certainly can be if you want it to be, because then I think wine, because it's so abstract and so amorphous and really only appeals to our most vestigial senses. Yes. You know, the taste and the smell, it's not how we build our picture of the world. And so we need these kind of metaphorical guidelines in a way, or inspirations to think about things. And so that crops up for me all the time. If we're thinking maybe about two different people in the Clos Vougeot, and after all, maybe the vineyard with the most ownership,
Yes.
the most different owners in all of Burgundy. The good ones, at least, all have an essential Clos Vougeot-ness. There is a character there that you can attribute to the vineyard that you don't find even over the road in Echezeaux, in Musigny, in very close by great vineyards. And yet, you line up 20 Clos Vougeot, they all taste different from the same vintage.
From the same area. Can you imagine, dear friends, we're talking about 56 hectares, 83 different owners at the least, not the most. And as you said so well, so many different styles.
Yeah, and so what's that most similar to? Why are they different? Well, it's sort of like interpretations of a piece of classical music. You could say that the notes are the same, but if you listen to 5 different people playing Bach, even, let alone the Romantic composers, they're very different. And yet, of course, you can identify the piece, as an old friend. And so that relationship between text and interpretation, I think, is an interesting parallel between worthwhile vineyards and the people who make them.
I'm with you. So shall we have a piece that will speak Burgundy, and then we're going to go and sit and taste some caviar, dear friends, because obviously the vibrational chord of Alex tells us that we want him to do another sparkling wine very uniquely designed for caviar and vice versa. Classical music, classical caviar. Where else can we go from there?
It's a good question. What could we do?
Oh la la, I'm having vibration. I'm having goosebumps.
You like that one?
Oh, I adore that one. Liking is a too soft of a word.
Do you recognize it?
I'm not sure. I'd rather have you tell us.
Sure, that's Brahms.
Oh!
The great wine lover.
Of course.
Johannes Brahms. Intermezzo, opus 118, number 2.
Intermezzo. Great name. When did he write that piece?
Oh, he wrote that, I couldn't give you the exact date, but I mean, it's towards the end of his life, so it's late 19th century.
Yeah.
And I think with that one, why Brahms is fascinating is that he's coming in this romantic period in music, and yet he's incredibly structured, and his heroes were Bach and Beethoven, and there is a lot of that mathematical counterpoint that you see in Bach that's sort of hidden in there, but one of the most interesting and lovely recordings of that piece I've ever heard was by the Bach master Glenn Gould. And I thought how interesting that, in fact, talking about interpretation of a text or a vineyard or a piece of music outside your normal compass. You know, it's like Glenn Gould was one of the Burgundians who have come over here and started interpreting with a similar sensibility the vineyards of the west coast of the USA. And within that, again, and this is something that I think all the great wines manage to do, you know, there is a sensuous quality to it and a lilting romantic quality, but structure and counterpoint and complexity all underneath. And so you can look at it and enjoy it either on that surface level of beauty or the intellectual level of working out actually how clever and economical and intricate the music is. And can't we do the same with a great wine?
Absolutely. Well, what does it make you think with this wine? I think that music, and I commend you of Brahms, is extraordinary with the sparkling wine. And the romance and the sense of seduction and that cadence and rhythm that you so well demonstrated on the keyboard was, as I was sipping the Surrealist from the Napa side of Carneros, a young wine, 2018, but was magnetic into this whole composition. Wonderful. I thought it went very well. What do you think of it? If you had to describe this wine into musical terms, how would you do it?
It's difficult because it's changing as well. You know, of course, as it sat in the glass, we're seeing less of the bubble and more of the wine.
Yes.
And that's what I like about sparkling. I mean, or rather, the sparkling wines that I like are the ones where the bubbles are kind of incidental. And this was something I learned very early on in my career, working with Champagne Jacquesson, who absolutely have that philosophy. You know,
yes.
This is a wine, first and foremost, and in the region where we find ourselves making this wine, the best wine we can make happens to be sparkling through the second fermentation. But it's incidental, and you start with a vineyard, first of all, not so often talked about in Champagne, perhaps, versus Burgundy. But if you take a Burgundy mindset,
well, they love
to the
assembly and
absolutely.
blend and blending vintages even, so they don't talk as much about the sense of place. But
and you know, and that's a great skill in itself. And some of my favorite champagnes are blended from vintages and vineyards and so on. But the care and attention that you can apply to a vineyard, even if you're blending several, I think is so important. And not to take the maximum amount of fruit allowed by the law, but contain the yields, get more character, you know, concentrate on it a little bit, and then you get these wonderful champagnes that can come out. And what I like about this wine is that it's not too fruity, and I think this is a fairly common issue with sparkling wines from many other places, including here.
yes.
That it goes against people's instincts to pick slightly unripe grapes. And the trouble is, I think by the time you pick grapes that would make a beautiful still wine, you're past that point. You're going to add 2 more degrees of alcohol. You're going to have a fruity flavor that doesn't really benefit or allow you to achieve the finesse that you want in a sparkling wine.
That's right.
And you end up with something quite clumsy. And this is not, I'm glad to say. That would be awkward. It really has a purity and a finesse and a lightness of touch, which I think a sparkling wine wants. And that's the tension. You want all of that element of finesse, but you don't want blandness. Because after all, it's very easy to be elegant if there's nothing there. If you're neutral, then elegance almost in a negative sense comes as part of the territory. But to have character and elegance, now that's difficult. And that's something that is very desirable, of course.
Well, thank you for this charismatic description. To the character of the wines, dear friend, now we're going to move from the Surrealist to the JCB number 8, the yin and the yang of wine. And we're going to have Alex give us another demonstration of his skills we're going to feed him caviar, and we're going to see how the bubbles, both of them, from the egg shape, dances with the bubbles. We'll be back shortly. So now, dear friends, the famous master of wine, Alex Hunt. I would like to tell you, not graduated from Cambridge, but Oxford. And there's a big difference between the two. So I nearly made the mistakes today in our Last Supper room. So it may be my last supper. He showed me a really fancy corkscrew. He may put it on my throat because you never confuse the two. And why is that, Alex? What's the competition between Oxford and Cambridge?
Well, because for maybe 100 years, Oxford had a monopoly. And then this, I guess in the 14th century, this upstart comes along and starts to provide a bit of competition for academic business. And so it's great to have that rivalry really between the two, and has produced so many memorable sporting clashes, the boat race being the most famous. It might not surprise you to learn that I was not a rower as a student, and nor did I play...
Well, you row on the piano, as we just saw.
It was definitely not a route I was physically strong enough to go down, nor rugby, nor football, nor cricket, nor any of those things. So my university sport of choice was competitive blind tasting.
Yes.
And there I found my métier and represented Oxford 2 times against Cambridge in the annual varsity blind tasting match.
Should we ask who won, or it's self-explanatory?
Oh, well, the first time it was very close. Very, very close. I mean, less than 1% difference between the teams. But it was a dark blue victory for Oxford by that margin. And in the second year, we managed to extend our lead.
Fantastic. So how do you do a blind tasting against such another school as Cambridge?
Well, the way it's set up as it's 2 flights. So it's like a proper sporting match, only in as much as there are 2 halves with a break in the middle. To regroup.
Yeah.
You have a team of 6 plus 1 reserve. 6 glasses are laid out in front of you of white wines, and the students need to identify the grape variety, the origin, the sub-region, the vintage, and give a little tasting note justifying it.
Wow.
6 white wines, 40 minutes, then a little break to recover from the stress.
And intensity!
And then back into the room, and there's no conferring. Back into the room for 6 red wines. Mm-hmm. Same thing. And you're spaced around the table, so it's Oxford, Cambridge all the way around. You hope there are going to be no dirty tricks, like someone wearing a lot of perfume, or trying to see what you're writing, or whatever it is. A bit of gamesmanship, and then 2 very renowned judges will take all the scripts, having blind tasted the wines themselves, so they have an idea of how they present. And in my year, it was Jancis Robinson and Hugh Johnson judging the papers. So that was an amazing thing. And I got to meet Jancis for the first time at the lunch afterwards. And that became a lifelong relationship with that amazing person. So,
for sure.
It was not just the skills, but the people. And I think that's true about a journey through wine all the way. A master of wine is the same thing. Mm-hmm. You're acquiring knowledge and skills and practicing and honing, but you can't do it in isolation. You meet other students, you travel the world and talk to winemakers and viticulturalists and merchants and marketing people, and really build up that network of knowledge that you can tap into, and a network of friends too.
And would you say that for you was a life-changing experience, these tastings, and that new métier that you identified? You could have been a pianist, which you are professionally in many ways as well, with your brother, who is a professional singer, a psychologist, and obviously a philosopher that you are anyhow. But what made you choose this path really in such a dramatic way? Because you went again the whole way, the entire journey to become a master of wine.
Well, I mean, I would say to begin with that I never had the patience and tenacity to become a professional musician. I mean, I know people who have, and that is a real monastic calling. If you're not practicing 8 hours a day, then you don't stand a chance. And so I never considered that as an option, but I did want to, at a certain point, become a record producer. I thought that would be interesting because that would allow me to blend my love of music with the technical aspect. I love tech, I love electronics and computers, and to be able to craft music while using that kind of equipment and other musicians struck me as a really interesting thing to do. But that's very hard to get into, and all the time I was dreaming of this, I was actually doing all the wine stuff at university. And then in a long line of amazing tastings and speakers that we had come to present wine to our student body, and it was such a privilege. But there was one in particular that really made a difference, and it was towards the end of my university career, and it was Paul Draper from Ridge. And he came along and presented a range of wines, and 2/3 of the way through that tasting, something changed in my brain, and I thought, okay, this isn't a hobby anymore, this is a career. And I met him for breakfast the next morning, and that just cemented the idea. It wasn't some, inebriated fantasy. It was actually something I wanted to pursue. And then with Jacques Casson also coming in with their champagnes, and having just bought their UK importer, they gave me my first step full-time into wine, and I got a job with them.
So it started with champagne.
Started, indeed.
Oh, I love the idea. But what a great story, because, life is so unique that there's a few events that could influence us for a lifetime. And for you, it's interesting for all of you, dear friends, with us today, is we have so many options in life.
Right.
Life is a theater of options, and I love it because you can express yourself in the way you desire. And one is not exclusive to the other. I mean, look, you practice all your training in a magnificent way, don't you?
I think you can, if you like making connections between ideas, then everything can come to bear. Certainly philosophy, and we talked about this last time, has plenty to say about wine and vice versa. And neuropsychology is an area that is fascinating to explore with regards to olfaction and how maintaining an interest in the smells and tastes around you can, it seems, potentially ward off Alzheimer's.
Yes.
There's some new research in that dimension at the moment. That's an amazing thing, because
I'd
after
love for
all,
you to tell us about this.
well, I don't know a great deal about it. It's just something that I picked up speaking to a really interesting guy who's called Dr. Barry Smith. And he is a philosopher in London working on the interface of sensory psychology with that. And he specializes in olfaction. And he was one of the first people, in fact, who brought to the attention of the authorities in the UK the fact that COVID depressed smell and taste.
That's right.
And that so many people, of course, from every kind of job, but particularly wine people, were really noticing that their senses were completely destroyed, at least temporarily, having got COVID. But for 8 weeks, it was not recognized as a symptom. It was classed as anecdotal by Public Health England. And Barry was one of the people really lobbying to say, look, guys, you need to take this seriously, because this could be one of the best markers for people then going to isolate and prevent the spread of the disease. And so at that point, olfaction, which is always bottom of the list because so much research goes into our primary senses, vision and audition, suddenly got a little bit of a boost. Wow. And he was front and center with that.
Fascinating. The neurons.
Oh yeah. And because it's so primal,
yes,
in our brains, even if it's not the one that we use to build up our picture of the world primarily. Nonetheless, it seems that those ancient connections really in the center of the brain are very, very important. And I hope there's going to be more research coming that will expand on this idea that remaining not just mentally active, doing the crossword or whatever, but really nasally active helps with brain function in later life.
I love it. And I'm very nasally active.
Well, exactly.
I think smell since birth everything I touch. I cannot not put my nose. And I'm, as you are, extremely sensitive to smell. This is why we developed all those candles and fragrances as well, because it's similar to this. And I'm very emotionally so reactive to it that in any given environment I go to, the smell plays an enormous role.
Well,
and often more than even anything else.
I mean, that definitely gives you I suspect, a great prognosis for a healthy brain.
Well,
in the future.
I'm not sure healthy brain. The way it's evolving, I don't really know. Well, talking about nose, so we are departed from the Los Carneros Napa Valley, the Surrealist, which happens to be our 100 case most allocated sparkling méthode champenoise, naturally, we make in the US. And here, this is one of my favorite vintage for, you know, vivacious and magnetic type of sparkling wine from France. This is number 8. This is a blend, the yin and the yang, the perfect shape, of Côte de Beaune, Chardonnay, and Côte de Nuit, Pinot Noir. So Alex, welcome to the world. I know you love it. Burgundy.
The best.
So how would you, in your beautiful words, describe this wine? You're the champagne sparkling wine expert.
This is, the first thing that comes to mind is brioche. You know, suddenly we're in a very French world here.
Yes.
And it's talking about the bubbles again and how little they contribute in a sense, and I mean that entirely positively.
Yes.
You know, this is an older wine. I believe this is 2012, and
That's
so
right.
you know, they have become just this little sparkling backdrop to the flavors of the wine, and it gives it a very sort of pillowy, gentle texture that I really like.
Dear friends, use that term, pillowy, gentle section. I love it.
The opposite of an aggressive, frothy kind of drink. And that allows these lovely, gentle, more savory, bready flavors, a little platform, you know, like a hovercraft. You know, it's just raised up by the bubbles, and I think it's delightful. Also because it's dry. You can tell me how much sugar there is in this, but there's not a lot.
No, seems to me. We around 4 grams.
Yeah, and see, I love that because again, it means there's nowhere to hide. You know, you have to have good fruit, and the fruit is doing the work. You're not relying on a second or even third addition of sugar into the bottle to bring it into balance. So that's my kind of fizz.
Well, and did you realize, dear friends, how well, you know, Alex described the wine without using technical terms? Brioche, pillow, mattress of the hovercraft, and great images that, you know, allows us to, 1, understand it, 2, want it, and 3, you know, you talk about the metamorphoses of how we describe wine. And I remember from Lichine to L'Église, great iconic writers about wine that really use the human body, the mind, to describe wine rather than just purely that technical, you know, vanilla type of way of talking about wine. And so what is your best way of describing it when you get really in your world as a great, phenomenal importer and conveyor of great wines in the UK, doing that makes people change their minds in tastings and events you do?
Well, I think you have to try and to capture the personality of the wine, you know, with an image or something anthropomorphic. You know, we describe wine as, you know, noble or upright or chaotic or whatever it might be. And on the one hand, I can see that to a non-wine drinker or a kind of a skeptic as to the culture of wine, this can seem incredibly pretentious. You know, worse even than listing the fruits and flowers and spices. I mean, that's bad enough, right?
Yes.
And then we're talking about this real abstract stuff. But I think provided people are willing to allow that language does have some kind of meaning, it's actually more helpful, because we could be, let's say we're drinking a lovely Pinot Noir together. You might say it's cherry, I might say it's raspberry. I mean, does it really matter?
No.
Who cares?
It's crazy!
Is the wine good? I mean, if you think it's great and I think it's horrible, that's already more interesting. And it could be horrible with cherry or great with cherry. So it's not a value judgment.
It has to be how the wine makes you feel.
Yeah.
And makes you think and transports you into another world, into that audacious world of imagination, rather than purely factual.
Well, I think so, because wine does have that ability to create an image in your mind or to transport you to a place. And surely that was an element of wine's great success during all the lockdowns that we've had in the last 2 years. In a way, it's a way to leave your house without leaving your house.
That's
and
right.
Especially if you've visited a wine region, if you've been on holiday and gone to a vineyard, and maybe you can access a wine from that region and drink it in your house, it should bring back memories. So that's the sort of first level of evocativeness.
Yes.
That it will recall another place simply through association. But of course, beneath that, there's wine's extraordinary ability as a foodstuff, and I guess tea and cheese and olive oil are in this category as well.
Yes.
To not just to recall an experience to the mind, but also to represent or in some way encapsulate the character of a place. And of course that's what we call terroir.
That's right. So talking terroir, we're going to go into the terroir of the ocean. I think we're going to challenge in a great way, because nothing can scare him, as you've noticed. We're going to go caviar. And this is the caviar de Royal, which is a very unique tasting characteristics. And we're going to taste it with JCB number 8. We'll have 2 more wines, so stay with us, dear friends. That's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to do it. We partner with our friend Thomas Keller, with Régis Sauva. So this is really the caviar that we hand-selected together. And we're going to do it both ways. So if you give me your hands, exactly, we're going to do it here. So you do it on this part of the hand, dear friends. This is where we do all the fancy caviar tasting around the world. And we're going to do it together. We're going to say cheers. Maybe we show each other the fist. Here we go. The chef way. And you go here to have, the nose, of course, as we discussed. And I'm going to let Alex give us the whole description of what he feels with and without the bubbles. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. And you do it here because there's no hair. It's the most sensitive part of your hand. So from the Caspian Sea side, all the way to the most fancy caviar maker around the planet, this is how they actually do that. And we'll do it as well with an oyster shell spoon, so then we can never tint with silver or gold or any other of the big minerals the flavor of those beautiful caviar eggs pearl. So, Alex.
The texture is amazing. I mean, how to describe that? It's yielding, but it's not completely soft. There's just that tiny bit of resistance, and you need to make just that smallest amount of effort to break it up and experience it in your mouth. And then with the bubbles, it's a lovely match, because it's texture for texture.
Yeah.
Neither one dominates the other.
That's right.
And that's really what you want. There's a lovely counterpoint between both the textural and, of course, the flavor components. But I think texture is something that's maybe underrated and under-discussed in wine. I think it's a huge part of the personality of a wine. And again, not really on that list of fruits and flowers that you see in so many tasting notes, which are all very well, but it's that textural component that really marks out superior wine, I think.
Absolutely. Please go in again. So now we'll go in with our spoon. You see, you have, ivory used to be the wine used in the old days, and then we moved to Oystershire. This is my favorite breakfast, lunch, and dinner. As much as I love smoked salmons and foie gras and all those fancy food, I think caviar for me, because of that texture you just described, wins. Because, what it brings to your mouth is not as good as a French kiss, ladies, just to remind you something that is very important to me as well. But really, that texture context is fantastic with the bubbles. I mean, it's refined. And often people look for so many ideas for appetizers or amuse-bouche. Often, and many of you come to our house or to our events, you're being handed one of those, and this is your course number one.
Easy, right? Done.
And you don't even need a blinis or crème fraîche or all the accoutrements because, I like it, but in many ways it overwhelms often. Wouldn't you say so, the purity of the caviar?
Yeah, I think it can do, even if those aren't very strongly flavored components in their own right. Is it necessary? I think probably with caviar this good, no.
That's right.
This is the accompaniment.
That's it. So Alex, you mentioned the brain, and you've studied it very diligently in psychology, in philosophy. Would you give us a little bit of an idea of how it works and how wine tastings and your mind function together as we're tasting another wine, which is, dear friends, by the way, the wine Alex brings into the UK. We're very grateful. We have a fabulous relationship. Oldest winery in the history of California, winery number 1. And this is Buena Vista Winery, founded in 1857. So Alex, thank you first and foremost for all what you do with us in the UK, in one of the finest region of fine wines in the world, England.
My pleasure. No, it's been really great starting this relationship with Buena Vista, and we have found every year more and more people wanting to buy it. It's of course been a challenge, and I will thank everyone for their patience as they've been waiting for our stock to arrive. And then of course it sells out because people are so thirsty for this. And now I think we are weeks away only from a very large shipment of Buena Vista arriving in London, which I'm excited about. And that should give us a little bit of breathing space just to get on and sell the wines, because I have not been buying any for myself. With a shortage, that seems to be a little bit cheeky to give myself an allocation out of our stock before anyone else can. We're customer first at Bertman Wine Cellars, but I think now when the big shipment arrives, I can go back to drinking this Chardonnay.
And why do you like the Chardonnay as an example? I mean, obviously, Alex is a student of history, not only of European history, but world history. And as we into wine, we love the first, we love the beginning. We know we love where it starts, right?
Sure, but I love this wine primarily for the flavor, to be honest, because I've been enjoying this wine since before visiting the beautiful buildings in Sonoma, which I did at the beginning of this week for the first time. And so, I mean, that was fascinating in its own right. But this, to me, actually seems to be a very modern wine. And I mean that in a positive sense, because I think wine culture is in a really good place right now. I think there is confidence in vineyard owners and in winemakers and in drinkers that allow them to make wines that are very happy in their own skin. And I feel that this is a good example, because Chardonnay in the USA, let's say there's a big spectrum of styles.
That's right.
It's of course one of the most versatile grape varieties around, and very widely planted through the world. And so then the question is, what kind of Chardonnay do I want to make? How much is it influenced by a consumer fashion and a taste for a certain style? How much do I want to represent the place in which I'm growing it? And the third question, which is often, and I hope this is getting less common as a question, how much do I want to replicate Burgundy? And
Woo! A lot of great questions. Did you hear the word, Alex, use spectrum of style, which I'm very excited, and we'll talk with Marnie Old a lot more soon about the spectrum of style that we've defined in the Passion for Wine book that we have. So that's a great question. Where do we want to be within the stylistic direction of a Chardonnay? Because isn't it the queen and king wine in the white wine category? I mean, Chardonnay, does it get any better? I know people say, again, Chardonnay, but there's so many styles.
Sure, and I mean, there are, of course, grape varieties that make staggeringly good white wines other than Chardonnay, because you can find great Rieslings, great Grüne Veltliners, you know, the list goes on and on. However, for an ability to capture a location and in a broad range of styles in so many countries around the world, Chardonnay has to be the top. There's no question in my mind that it is in the very top tier, alone as a white grape, alongside Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Pinot Noir.
That's it.
For the ability to do that. And does that confer on every single Chardonnay made some kind of magic status? No, of course not, but we're talking about potential at scale.
That's right.
That you can really build a community of excellence and find a density of very interesting wines in places around the world with Chardonnay. And of course, you know, Burgundy is the proof of concept of that. But I think the west coast of the USA is very much one of those places where you find many Chardonnays that are interesting in their own right and also form a group that is very interesting to consider as a group, because it comes back to this question of sight on the one hand, the text, and interpretation. And I can see why in the beginning people were tempted to make wines that tasted as close as possible to Burgundy, because you know, that was a very familiar and successful and popular style. So yes, you know, that seems to be in a simplistic way, a sensible commercial decision at the beginning. And then you can see why the absolute opposite, you know, the really buttery, butterscotchy, tropical, oaky, full-on style also became popular, because it was totally different. And so it was shocking and new and appealing to a whole different group of people, or on different grounds, as a genuine and valid new style. And so when I call this a modern Chardonnay, what I mean by that is that it is very much a representation of where it's from. I can taste the sunshine and that lovely, generous fruit quality.
That's it.
But it has, let's say, the same values as a Burgundy. Not the same flavors, but the same values.
I love this, dear friends. I hope you hear this.
Because it's refreshing.
That's it.
And it's locally representative. Because funnily enough, if you're in Carneros and you make a wine that is designed to taste exactly like Burgundy, you're not espousing Burgundy values, because that would be crazy as someone in Chassagne-Montrachet saying, oh, I really want to make a wine that tastes exactly like Sonoma Coast. I mean, which would be kind of cool. I would be interested to try that. But can you imagine anyone in that village ever setting out on that path? I mean, and this is just as crazy.
As crazy. Crazy.
And so it represents to the same degree and with the same success, you know, because it's refreshing and it's nuanced and it's not trying to be anything else. And I think if you're making a facsimile of someone else's style, it's never going to be as successful, because you're forcing the fruit to do something that it's not necessarily comfortable to do. Whereas this, to me, seems like a happy wine. It's bright, it's expressive, it's relaxed, it's comfortable doing what it does, and that in turn makes me happy and relaxed when I drink it.
Ooh la la! Dear friends, what an explanation. And I think, you could phenomenally analyze Alex's answer into 4 or 5 different parts. And I recommend you replay this and dive into wine the way he describes it, from the spectrum of style all the way down to the different flavors on either side of the spectrum as far as where we want to be, to the sense of place, to the emotion it derives. And I think that's very well said. There should be a book written on that, Alex. Maybe we should embark on that one day. A Franco-English book. Can you imagine on the intellectual, emotional, neuropathologic path of wine and the brain?
Why not?
Let's do it. That would be fun, because I know we'll have an amazing musician to relax. I can provide a lot of the wines, and Alex can provide a lot of the content of the brain and the music. So Alex, let's maybe a try with the caviar, because we're going to have to finish this, because we have a little surprise for Alex, dear friends, as we coming close to an end for this amazing time. And I know everybody's going to go to dinner now, and thanks to Alex, think differently about music, about wine, about description, about the brain, about history, about life's path. Because your life path, do you think there's destiny that took you where you are? Or do you think you've influenced your path?
I think, no, I mean, I don't believe in destiny or fate as a kind of, an external, independent, universal force at all. But I think a combination of good fortune and instinct and good decisions can give the impression of that. And there's being in the right place at the right time, of course. But at the same time, identifying that you're in the right place at the right time is a big part of that.
Yes.
And that could be an analytic process, or it could be an instinctive one. But I wonder how often we end up in the right place at the right time without realizing or doing anything about it.
Yeah, but yes, I'm with you 100%. But how do you explain, Alex, your success and your incredible intellectual, mental, physical style of who you are today? And I could tell you, I know a lot of people in the world of wine, as you all know. Alex is one of the most amazing. And you are where you are. I don't think it's purely because you've realized it. I somehow feel that all what you've done before and all the things that happened, from the blind tasting that you've organized at Oxford against Cambridge, to meeting Jancis, to meeting Paul Draper, to then, Jackson Champagne and being part of this. Do you really think it's an accident of time, or it was somehow written?
I don't think it was pre-decided by anybody. No, I think it's a succession of. Well, I mean, if I call it accidents, then that sounds like it's underplaying the sort of privilege that I started with, because going to Oxford and having the opportunity to be part of that wine community and meet the people that I did, that is a huge privilege that gave me an advantage, for sure.
Yes.
And I'm always humbled to meet friends in the wine business who didn't have that leg up right at the start.
Which I did, very fortunately.
Obviously, you come from a great family background of this. My university was, in a sense, the equivalent in my life. But there are some great people, some great masters of wine who didn't start with either of those advantages, and probably had to apply even more of what you and I certainly have, which is the component we didn't discuss yet. Yeah. A ton of work.
That's it.
The old phrase, it takes 15 years to become an overnight success, springs to mind. That not only, if you just let good things happen to you, they will dissipate very quickly. You know, letting the good thing happen to you is just day one, and the next 100 days or 1,000 days or 10,000 days are where you work to capitalize on that good fortune. And you know this because none of this around us happened by accident. You know, this is the result of years and years of thought and labor and love pouring into it. And this is the other big component, I think, is if you are fortunate enough to stumble across something that you love to do, then you'll work twice as hard. And that gives you the competitive edge.
That's right.
Whereas if you are in an environment where you're needing to work at something you're not particularly interested in, are you going to give it that extra? Maybe not. Maybe not.
Great wine for thoughts. I'm not saying food for thoughts because we're not yet there. Alex, I suggest maybe you have the last bites of the caviar eggs because we're going to be pouring you something very special. So it's a big surprise. It's the last few minutes of our wonderful time with Mr. Alex Hunt, a master of wine and masters of so many things of the brain. We're going to give him a spoon, JCB spoon, historical spoon. As you could see, that spoon was carved all the way in Eastern Europe. And I believe as early as a century you mentioned, 14th or 15th century, made from crystal. And we're going to surprise Alex with one of the oldest one of all time. He'll tell us all about it because I know he knows a lot about it. He doesn't know anything about it now. It's a vintage 2000. It's a very unique elixir. It's actually a gift of God in many ways. This is the Essentia. So look at what we're doing, friends. You can all do this as well. We went to the history of Hungary, and we are one of the only one in the world actually making an Essentia allowed by the wonderful ministry of Hungary, the first minister, who said, as you are Buena Vista, Count Haraszti, first winery in California, we honored as Hungarian. So we created with Buena Vista the sisterhood partnership between Tokaj and Sonoma. That's a very big deal. And in exchange, Hungary was so proud as a nation, they said, let's create a wine that you could brand under JCB and under Buena Vista, and we have the same version under Buena Vista. We happen to be at JCB today, so we thought we would try it. And this is a Tokaj Essentia 2000. So, Alex, I know it's a big surprise.
What a treat.
I gave him time as my long explanation for his brain to adjust, but his brain adjusts in a split second. So,
well, it's certainly a long way from Carneros Chardonnay. And, 19 years older as a vintage, but so much more ancient as a wine, or a kind of wine, because...
maybe tell everyone the process, because this is amazing.
Like a modern definition of wine, if we're in the EU, there's a minimum alcohol level that it has to have, and this is nowhere close to that. It's 2% alcohol only, and it would have taken years to get there, because the juice of this free-run botrytis-affected grapes is so sweet. I mean, 650 grams, wasn't it, more or less, when picked?
Exactly.
And
that's exactly it, by the way. He's guessing, and it's right.
So that's 65% sugar right there. And the poor yeasts, they're kind of comatose before they even get going when they're trying to convert any of that sugar to alcohol. It's like, it would be like wading through treacle in order to get food. And so years later, they've managed to get all the way to 2%, bless them, and then given up. And so the wine still has more than 600 grams per litre of sugar. It's still more than 60% sugar in the liquid. And so it really is, it's an essence.
Pure sugar.
It's an essence, it's like the honey of the wine world.
But natural sugar.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's just come from the the grapes getting ripe and then getting concentrated by botrytis, the fungus that is called noble rot. And that's another amazing thing to contemplate, isn't it? And I think everyone should try in their lives a wine affected by noble rot. And then, only then, they should look at a picture of a bunch of grapes affected by this fungus, because the idea that anyone would attempt to make a wine out of that kind of mush is something that blows my mind.
Absolutely.
But some of the greatest wines, and certainly the great sweet and fortified wines, all seem to have been through some kind of process of destruction and come out the other end, whether it's rot or freezing or dehydration or oxidation. Something terrible has happened to that wine or those grapes, and they have come out the other side stronger, more complex, immortal for that reason. And
immortal.
that's an exciting
So
thing.
imagine, dear friends, anything happening to you. It's a great lesson of life. What you just explained from Mother Nature, we all came out with something even better than we never thought about from a drama situation. And I think it's so well said. I'm going to replay this passage of our interviews today because it's exactly true. Those four metamorphoses, evolution of the grapes, where you think that's the end of the world. In fact, on the other side of the tunnel, you came with something amazing. And something which is really the wines of the gods. We call it in the mythology the wines of the ultimate gods, or the wines of the kings, which was served at the English, and still today, king and queen's table at all time, as well as the French, right? The Tokai Azul, or the Essentia, or the Sauterne.
Right. I mean, those great botrytis-affected wines to which you could add, if you're fortunate enough, the Beerenauslesen and Trockenbeerenauslesen of Germany and Austria. Again, almost impossible to find, incredibly rare because most of the water is gone, and quite often the process fails and you have the wrong kind of rot. And I mean, there are so many things that can go wrong. It staggers me that anyone still bothers to do this. And we are so grateful as wine consumers, we must be, to everyone in Sauterne, in Tokai, in those regions of Germany and Austria making this kind of wine, because it's not profitable in the main. It's an enormous amount of work for way less reward than you would get making a wonderful Cabernet or something like that. And yet, because of the history and because the wines are extraordinary, we get to enjoy them still. And I always find it humbling, because I wouldn't have the patience and tenacity and bravery to create something like that.
That's right. So now comes the time, the ultimate moment of our time together, Alex. So we hold it, obviously, from that side, right? And you could think it's like a violin of reverse, and you play with the immediate string close to you. So voila. Oof.
It's amazing.
So Alex, it's all you, and this is actually something regal and enduring and unequaled in the world, that are the three words behind every JCB wine, and this is those that I'm going to be serving actually for Thanksgiving, because we're going to be 30 of us, and this is going to be so much fun because it's unexpected. And the moment you basically experience this, you say to yourself, I've never done anything similar to this. What do you think?
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, the intensity of flavor, but not just that. It's not cloying and syrupy as it might be. It's not like drinking melted honey, despite having the same sugar content, because the difference is acidity. And this is really the defining feature and structure of all wine, ultimately. It's an interplay of alcohol and acidity, and other elements come in optionally, like tannin. But here, alcohol is very low, but the acidity has been concentrated, and therefore it balances out the sugar, and it makes for a delightfully intense rather than a stupefyingly sweet mouthful of wine. It's amazing. And thank you for sharing it, because I know how rare this is. I mean, how many bottles of this have
I
been
believe
produced?
only 200 released.
Right.
So it's all handmade in Hungary. You can all see the flag of Hungary. So it's made in Hungary. We provide them the labels of Buena Vista and JCB. And it's a gift of God. I mean, it's an act of phenomenal experience. As the theater goes, this is kind of the ultimate act of discovering something that after this, you reflect on time. And what Alex said so well is the great time, the worst time that you could turn into great times, because you can end up with this.
I can still taste it.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much there.
Today, textural experience, sensory experience, the sound. Thanks to Alex, dear friend, we had all the senses at play. Alex, I'd love for you to look at all our friends. You know, we're about to turn to 2022, you know. You know, it's a big deal. We go back, as you said, shackled for 2 years in our own places. We're going to live a new era again. And what would be your big statement? And it could have to deal with music, brain, tastings, anything you want. The floor is yours.
Well, I think if we've learned anything over the last 2 years or so, is that life is unpredictable, and that sensory experiences are very important. And we don't know what's around the corner anymore. I think this pandemic still has a few twists and turns left to surprise us. We're not out of the woods yet, but we know that with wine and food and music enriching our lives and bringing us together and connecting us with the people and places that we love, life can go on and we can still enjoy it.
So we're going to have a toast to all of you, one with our spoon and our other spoon, because we still have caviar to go through.
Spoons.
Here we go. We're having a toast, dear friends, to texture and all the senses. Thank you, Alex, for these concerts. Thank you for this great reflexive world. And you keep engaging us into thinking differently, like a surrealist and a Renaissance man. So let's all be like Alex.